is about imagining a world that Marx and his cohort don't define because it doesn't reflect the reality of African people. So it could be deemed surreal, but for one thing. Surrealism, if we look at it, Wilfredo Lam, the Cuban artist. Ted Jones, the African born in the United States, was a poet and artist. People, many of them identified with the surrealist movement, or African people who were tapping into what Robinson would call the black radical tradition. He would say, this isn't surrealism, this is what we've been doing all along. It's only looked at as surreal because the system is looking at it like this is so foreign to us, whatever. And when you see a Picasso, for example, Robinson would probably argue that Picasso is somebody overhearing the black radical tradition who tries to reimagine it in terms that are very unfamiliar to Europe, so they stick him, Dali, and everybody else in the surrealist camp. Why? We never saw that strange thing before. Yet it's very common to black people. You look at Picasso's painting and say, that's really out there. And then you go to Africa and be like, that ain't even good. You understand? But to raise the point you made here, surrealism for Robinson would be an offshoot in part of a black radical tradition that does have rhythms that don't require other world imagining. So he would say Coltrane's part of the black radical imagination. And they didn't use the word surrealism when Louis Armstrong came out, but Armstrong's music might be considered surreal. Billie Holiday's singing, phrasing might be considered surreal. At any given moment, an African articulation that is foreign to the system it finds itself in might be considered surreal. Surrealism, yes, is that thing along that whole thing. Yes, yes.
And that was what I took the preface to.
All right.
You have to use someone else's lens to comprehend or to explain the resistance movements that you were that we as African people have been doing. Like, that's why I appreciate the term black radical tradition. You don't have to use Marxism or surrealism to explain the things that we've been doing for centuries, because it's like you say all the time, black people or anybody, anytime you do something to oppress a person, they're going to resist it in the manner in which they do. It doesn't have to be classified as surrealism or Marxism because we have those characteristics in our own tradition.
That's right. That's right. And that is the challenge. The black radical tradition requires you to be in conversation with yourself and to use that conversation to drive how you then act upon the world you live in. It requires you to recognize that that's what you've been doing all along. And it requires the thinkers among us to not only recognize that, but to broadcast that to everybody else. So that's exactly right. I mean, today's example that I raised from the meeting we had earlier today is a good example. The United States has a military. It's based on the same military as everywhere else in the world, the Western world. How should we approach studying the military for those of us, those of your colleagues who are now going on to careers in the military? Is there a way to do that? Yes. Maybe instead of warfare at the center of military studies, peace should be at the center of military studies. That might seem surreal. However, if you tap into the black radical tradition, what you will find is that many of the conflicts, particularly conflicts that involve African people fighting off oppression, let us go, if I can find it, because again, this is the book I'm marking up again as we go. Haitian Revolution. Let's go maybe to page 147. No. Yeah. No. Bottom. Y'all know what I'm looking for? Maybe. We haven't gotten that far. No, it's in that chapter. I'm not going to look for it right now. I'm going to make the point. I'm going to look for the language. We'll get to the language. The bottom point is this. In studies of violent resistance to enslavement, the Haitian Revolution, revolutions in Brazil. Yeah. What? What are you going to say?
Even though the word radical, even that word kind of reveals the wrong theory and lens that we're looking through, because what's radical is often enacted by the masses of black people. So why would it be radical if it's a norm in our community?
That's exactly right. But this is the thing, right? Why is it called the black radical tradition? Because it is seen as having been brought into existence by the resistance to Western hegemony, Western domination. It is radical to the West. But in one respect, at least, it's radical to African people. Why would it be considered radical to black people to use who we are to resist this moment? What is radical about that? The stuff we're using? No. What? Huh? Having to resist, right. The radical thing is the circumstance, not the behavior. In fact, I like the way Cornel West answers this. And Cornel West is very much in tune with Cedric Robinson, except he stopped short. We'll talk about that later. Cornel West many years ago wrote and still talks about this black encounter with the absurd. He said, what we encountered 5 centuries ago was absurd. You're minding your business one day, the next day you're butt naked on a boat, the next day you're in a field picking cotton or chopping sugar cane, and people saying, oh, you look nothing like you, and they got pistols. That is absurd. Yet it is the point of departure for how we imagine our identity in the world now. We don't start with what we were doing before we were so rudely interrupted. We don't even start with being on the ship talking about what the hell happened. We start as if being in that cotton field with a scrap around our waist and a cutlass in our hand is where we start history. That is absurd. Sounds kind of absurd when you put it that way. It's absurd. And then we talk about everything after that. I got a pair of shoes. I got to stand up. We made a machine to get better cotton. We ran away and then got to mop floors and save 3 pennies and buy a hut. And progress! Because the memory of what we were doing before that moment happened has been completely erased. And not at the same time. West makes the point, Robinson makes the point, Robinson makes it much better than West. West makes the point that our memory of what we were doing was erased, but what was not erased was the practices of what we were doing. So even the way we resisted was informed by everything that took place before we got dumped in those fields. And that has been our resistance to our encounter with the absurd. It is radical because we had to put it to use in a context we've never seen before. That's what makes it radical for us. But as Angie said, ripping out what Saldez said, when you see it is characterized as radical in the context of the system that put us in that place. Well, the last thing you Negroes are supposed to do is put on some clothes and walk out the field. That's considered radical. Why is it radical? Because that ain't why we brought you here. Please understand that there is nobody living or going to ever be born who can ever make the case with any credibility that where we are right now was somewhere anybody either predicted for us, expected of us, or expects us to maintain. You Negroes are a negligible factor in the history of Western civilization. And the fact that you're here at all is a testament to your will and your skill, not anybody else's help. Because if you could be dead, you would have been killed. Slavery was over 150 years ago in this country. Why are you still here? So that's your presence is a radical intersection. You know what I'm saying? Ain't you? You know, that's a radical idea. Damn right. We were never supposed to go to school. I was supposed to be still chopping sugar. Are you crazy? Or dead? I'm labor. Labor doesn't have an identity. I'm the help. And when you stand up 7 first to do such and such, that's radical in another context. So let's continue. Very important. Yes. Yes, here we go. I'll be damned. Thank you, whoever that was. Page 168. Second paragraph. Begins with the word there, right? He just got finished talking about the Haitian Revolution. That is actually the second page in chapter 7, the nature of the black radical tradition. Warfare. We're here at Howard. We're going to study warfare. We're going to study leadership. We're going to study all those euphemisms that are used in Reserve Officer Training Corps. And we're going to do it from a black perspective. No, from an African perspective, with the African radical tradition. Meaning what? Violence. In cases of resistance. Haiti, Brazil, other places where they had to fight for their freedom, which meant somebody had to die. It ain't easy to get somebody up off your neck. The David Walker plan is pretty much the plan that black people used when they were being nice. You taught me Christianity? Yes. You a Christian? Yes. Good. I got one question. What? Do you believe